The first time I saw the night card, I thought it was only a relic that belonged behind glass. One more treasured object in the Moon archive. One more story pressed flat between velvet and silence. I was wrong. Some things are not meant to be observed. They are meant to be answered. It happened on the eve of the lantern drift, when the city's bridges wore ribbons of light, and the canals carried reflection like a second sky. I was on my late shift, alone in the Hall of Quiet Treasures, where the air always smelled faintly of cedar and starlight ink. My job was simple: keep the catalog honest, keep curious hands away from the old enchantments, and keep my own curiosity locked behind my teeth. I should tell you what kind of elf I am, because the courts love their categories. I am not a warrior with a crown of iron leaves. I am not a singer who can turn grief into birds. I am not one of those shimmering nobles who move as if the world itself is a carpet they never wrinkle. I am a scribe, a keeper of written things, a woman who grew up believing that words are safer than wishes. My name is Saelis. The night card rested in a drawer, lined with black moth silk. The label on its tag was brief, almost reluctant. Night card, origin, unverified, function, unverified, notes, do not activate. Under that, in a much older hand, not for those who want to be heard. Naturally, the warning hit me like a dare. I was supposed to be verifying the new moon inventory, matching the objects to their entries, ensuring nothing had been misfiled. The archive can forgive a smudge. It cannot forgive a misplacement. And yet my gaze kept drifting toward that drawer, toward the way the moth silk seemed to drink the lamplight. I told myself I would not open it again. Then the lanterns outside dimmed in a wave, as if a cloud passed over the whole city at once. The candles in the hall did not flicker. They simply hesitated. A pause in the flame, a pause in the air, the kind of pause you feel right before a name is spoken. My fingers moved before my mind agreed. I slid the drawer open. The night card was smaller than I expected, a rectangle no wider than my palm, made of a material that looked like polished obsidian, but felt warmer than stone. Its surface was not blank. It held a depth like a lake at midnight. If I angled it, I could see constellations, tiny points of light arranged in patterns that did not belong to our sky. I should have shut the drawer. Instead, I lifted it. It was heavier than it should have been, not in weight, more like responsibility. The instant my skin made contact, something in the card recognized me. There was no shock, no dramatic burst of light, no thunder, no choir. There was a soft, inward pull, like the first breath you take after crying, when you realize you are still alive. The lamplight around me warmed. The shadows under the shelves sharpened, and the air became aware of itself. A thought pressed against my mind. Gentle, curious, unmistakably not my own. Who are you? I jerked, nearly dropping the card. My heart slammed so hard my ribs stung. I looked around the hall, expecting to see a prankster among the cases, a coworker hiding behind a column. No one. The question came again, clearer, like a voice heard through water. Who touched the night? I swallowed. My mouth went dry. The archive was silent, but the silence felt crowded, as if the shelves were leaning closer to listen. I did not answer out loud. The hall had ears. It always had. In my mind, I formed the words with careful precision, as if writing them onto parchment. I am Saelis, a scribe. The card warmed against my palm. The constellations on its surface shifted, rearranging as if reacting to my name. Saelis, the voice repeated, and there was a faint note of disbelief. A name like a leaf in winter, a name that has been kept too long. I should explain something else. We elves are taught to guard our minds the way we guard our homes. Thoughts are doors, feelings are windows. You do not leave them open at night. But this voice did not force its way in. It approached like someone standing on the other side of a closed door, waiting to be invited. My pulse steadied enough for me to think. The night card was forbidden to activate. It was unverified, uncatalogued, unknown. Unknown things can be dangerous, or they can be honest. Who are you? I asked back, still in my mind, still careful. There was a pause, so long that I wondered if I had imagined everything, then an answer that made my skin prickle. I am the one who cannot sleep. I held my breath. That phrase in the old songs belonged to only one figure, spoken rarely, and only behind closed curtains, the Elf King. In our realm, his name was not used lightly, not because he was cruel. No, the stories didn't agree on his cruelty. They agreed on something worse. They agreed he listened, not to praise, not to politics, to dreams. My fingers tightened around the night card. If you are truly the king, I thought, then why do you speak to me? The card pulsed once, a quiet beat under my skin. Because you touched a night card that was made for hearing. My throat went tight. A memory surfaced, the warning scribbled in old ink. Not for those who want to be heard. It wasn't a warning about danger. It was a warning about desire. Outside, the lantern drift began again. Music rose from the canal paths. Distant laughter, the bright illusion of an ordinary night. In the hall, my lamplight held steady. The card's constellations glowed faintly, like embers trying to remember they were stars. Saelis, the voice said, softer now, and I felt something like loneliness brush the edge of my mind. Do you know what it is to speak into darkness and have it answer? I stared at the card. My reflection wasn't on it, only the night. I should have put it back. Logged an incident, called the keeper, burned a cleansing sprig of frost thyme. Instead, I whispered inside my own thoughts, the way you whisper secrets to the ocean because it cannot repeat them. I know what it is to speak and not be heard. The card warmed again, as if in recognition. Then, without warning, the hall's shadows slid, not threatening, simply rearranging, as if making room for a presence that was not physically there but was unmistakably near, and I felt it. The attention of someone very far away turning toward me, as easily as a person turns toward a voice in the next room. The Elf King was awake, and somehow, impossibly, he was listening to me. If this hooked you, and you want the next part, leave a comment telling me what you think the night card truly is, and subscribe so you don't miss the continuation. I should have returned the night card to its drawer the moment I felt him notice me. That would have been the sensible thing, the safe thing, the archive-approved thing. Instead, I stood there, with my palm pressed to midnight, my breath too shallow, my mind too loud. In the Hall of Quiet Treasures, silence isn't emptiness. It's a kind of agreement. The objects sleep because we promise not to wake them. We promise not to want anything from them. The moment you want, the moment you reach for more than knowledge, you become the most dangerous creature in the room. I wanted an answer, or perhaps I wanted something even worse, to matter. The attention I felt wasn't like a gaze on skin. It was a presence in thought, a gentle weight that made my mind feel defined, as if I had been a smudge on glass until now, and suddenly someone had wiped the pain clean and said, "There you are." "Saelis," the voice murmured again, not as a question this time, but as a careful repetition, like the king was testing whether my name might fracture under his tongue. I didn't respond immediately. I forced my fingers to loosen. I lowered the night card to the table beside the catalog ledger, as if placing it down could also place down the fear swelling behind my ribs. If you are truly the king, I thought, then you should not be speaking through forbidden relics. You should be surrounded by counselors and guards and all the traditions that keep a realm intact. A hint of amusement touched my mind, so faint I almost mistook it for my own imagination. Traditions keep a realm intact, Saelis. They do not keep a heart intact. My cheeks warmed. The way he said heart was quiet, as if it was a thing he didn't like admitting he had. I glanced toward the tall arched windows. Beyond them, the city glimmered. Lanterns drifted along the canals, and the faint music of the festival slid between the stones. People were laughing. People were dancing. The king was listening to me through a card that should never have been activated. "What is the night card?" I asked, because if I didn't hold to questions, my courage would dissolve into pure wonder. There was a pause, and in it I felt something like caution. Not toward me, toward memory. "A door," he answered finally. "Not a door of wood, a door of attention. It was made, long ago, for a purpose that was abandoned. Abandoned by whom? By me." The words landed with surprising softness. No pride, no grand confession. Only the quiet truth of someone stating an old regret. My heart stumbled. Why would an elf king craft something forbidden and then abandon it? Kings don't abandon power. They collect it. They hoard it. They turn it into law. Unless the power was never meant for ruling. Unless it was meant for reaching. My eyes fell to the surface of the card. The constellations were shifting slowly, like a sky trying to remember the shape of the world beneath it. I knew the archive's cataloging rules. I knew the ink signatures of every curator who had ever touched the collection. This card had no maker's mark, but I was holding his attention like a thread, and I could feel the way his mind followed mine, not intruding, but present. "Why me?" I asked, because my chest felt too full of that question to keep it hidden. Why would the card answer to me? This time the pause held a different weight. Embarrassment, perhaps, or something close to it. "Because you didn't demand," he said. "You didn't command it. You touched it as if it might be fragile." I stared at my hand, at the ink stains along my knuckles, at the small cut near my thumb from a paper edge earlier that day. Fragile. He thought the night card was fragile, or he thought I was. The hall's door handle clicked. My whole body snapped into motion. Instinct, training, panic. I snatched up the night card and slid it into the drawer, then pushed the drawer closed so gently it didn't even whisper. The door opened, and Keeper Verilyn stepped inside, his silver hair bound in a strict knot. His robe smelled like old parchment and judgment. He held a lantern staff in one hand, its crystal light steady and cold. "Saelis," he said, and his gaze swept the room in a way that made me feel like a shelf being inspected for dust. "Why are the lamps warmer than the catalog standard?" I forced my face into calm. I forced my voice into the careful politeness of a scribe who had nothing to hide. "The festival lanterns outside. Keeper. Reflections. Sometimes they shift the hall's light." Verolin's eyes narrowed slightly, as if measuring the lie for gaps. He stepped closer to my desk, his attention landing on the open ledger, the neat lines of inventory. He did not see the drawer, or if he did, he pretended he didn't. He set the lantern staff down and leaned over my shoulder, reading my entries. "You've been thorough," he said at last, and the compliment felt like a blade wrapped in silk. "The Hall of Quiet Treasures is not a place for personal fascination. Remember that." I swallowed. "Yes, Keeper." He lingered a moment longer, his presence heavy in the air. Then he straightened and moved back toward the door. Before he left, he paused as if listening. His gaze flicked toward the windows. "Do you hear it?" he asked, voice lower. I froze. "Hear what?" The keeper's mouth tightened. He didn't answer. He only said, "Lock the hall when you finish, and do not touch what is not meant to be touched." Then he left, the door closing behind him with a soft, final click. For several breaths, I didn't move. I listened to the hall. I listened to my heartbeat. I listened to the faint music outside, the laughter, the life, and beneath it all, barely there but unmistakable once you noticed it, a thin ringing hum, like a distant string being plucked in a room you couldn't enter. The night card, or the king. My hands trembled as I reached for the drawer again, not to open it, not yet, just to rest my fingertips against the moth silk wood as if it might reassure me. In my mind, I formed words without moving my lips. "Are you still there?" The answer came immediately, and it was so close it startled me. Yes, the single word held something I couldn't name. Relief, perhaps, or the quiet thrill of someone who has been alone in a crowded palace and has finally found a voice that doesn't ask for anything from him except truth. "Saelis," he added, and the way he said my name this time felt less like testing and more like claiming a fact. "Someone is searching for the card." My stomach dropped. "Who?" A soft, grim edge entered his thoughts. "Someone who believes the night card can be used to make a dream obey." I stared at the closed drawer. In the city outside, lanterns drifted like harmless stars. In the hall, I realized I had done more than touch a relic. I had opened a door, and now something on. The other side had noticed the light. For a long moment, I sat perfectly still with my fingertips resting on the drawer, as if the wood could anchor me. The hum beneath the archive's silence had grown clearer now that I knew to listen for it. Not loud, not obvious, just persistent, like a thought you can't unthink once it arrives. "Someone is searching for the card," the king had said. I wanted to ask a dozen questions at once, but the hall itself felt like it might be listening. Even alone, the archive is never truly empty. It remembers sound. It keeps impressions. It holds on to intent, the way fabric holds perfume. So I kept my thoughts narrow and careful. "How do you know?" I asked in my mind. "Because the night card is not only a door," he answered. "It is a signal. When it wakes, it leaves a trace." My stomach tightened. The word trace made me think of footprints in fresh snow, of a path someone could follow straight to my desk. Then why did it respond to me? I pressed. "Why now?" His attention shifted, and for the first time I felt something like weariness pass through him, a tide pulling back. "Because it was lonely," he said. "Because I was lonely, and because you were near it when the night leaned thin." The night leaned thin. I glanced again toward the windows. Lantern lights slid across the canal like melted gold. The festival had drawn the city's attention outward, into music and crowds and wishes. In moments like these, the boundaries between one mind and another can soften. Stories said so. Scribes wrote it as metaphor. I had always assumed it was only poetry. Now it felt like a warning disguised as beauty. "Who is searching?" I asked again. A name would help. A name would let me decide how afraid I should be. He hesitated. "Not a stranger," he finally said. "Someone who once stood close enough to hear me breathe." A chill ran over my arms, though the lamps were warm. Close enough to hear him breathe. That meant palace corridors. That meant inner circles. That meant someone with access to his sleep and his secrets. And it meant that if they wanted the night card, they might already know it was hidden in the archive. I forced myself to think like a scribe, not like a frightened girl standing alone with forbidden starlight in her hands. If the card leaves a trace when activated, then keeping it in the drawer is dangerous, I thought. "Yes," he answered immediately, as if he had been waiting for me to arrive at the same conclusion. "Very." My throat went dry. I should report this. That was the lawful thing, the correct thing. The keeper would take it, lock it away deeper, perhaps send word to the palace. But Keeper Verolin's earlier warning echoed in my head, too perfectly timed to feel like coincidence. "Do "Do not touch what is not meant to be touched," and his strange question before he left. "Do you hear it?" Had he heard the trace, or had he heard something else? I closed my eyes briefly and tried to imagine the chain of events if I confessed. Varlin would look at me the way he looked at dust and broken seals. He would ask how. He would ask why. He would ask whether I understood the consequences of awakening a relic marked unverified. Then he would take the night card, and if he was part of the search, I would be delivering it into the very hands that wanted to make a dream obey. My chest felt too tight for the air I was breathing. "What do they intend?" I asked the king. "You said they want to make a dream obey. How?" A softness brushed my mind, like someone lowering their voice for a confession. "In our realm," he said, "dreams are not only private, they are a river the ancient magic still drinks from. Whoever can shape that river can shape what people long for, what they fear, what they forgive. Some believe the easiest throne is the one built inside another's sleeping mind." I stared at the closed drawer, as if I could see through it. My thoughts, my sleep, my own private river suddenly felt exposed, as if a curtain had been pulled aside. "Can they reach me through it?" I asked, and hated how small the question sounded. "Not unless you open the door," he replied. "Not unless you touch the night again. But the trace you already made may bring them close." The word close landed like a stone. I stood abruptly, chair scraping softly against the floor. The sound seemed too loud in the hall. I listened for footsteps. Only the distant music outside answered. My hands moved with purpose now, because purpose is the only thing that keeps fear from swallowing you whole. The archive had rules, but it also had loopholes. Not because anyone wanted it that way, because the world is messy, and even the most careful catalog cannot account for every object that arrives with a story attached. There were holding compartments for items awaiting verification. There were transit cases for relics being moved between halls. There were misfile drawers that had been sealed for decades because no one remembered what they contained, and no one wanted to admit it. I knew every one of those places. If the night card stayed in its labeled drawer, anyone with access to the catalog could request it, claim an audit, or simply take it when the hall was unobserved. If it moved somewhere unmarked, it would buy time. Time to think. Time to understand what I had opened. Time to decide whether I could trust the keeper, or whether I had already become a piece on a board I couldn't see. I pulled a transit case from beneath the desk, a plain cedar box with a bronze clasp, the kind used for routine transfers. I didn't light any special candle. I didn't draw any obvious ward. Anything dramatic would leave a bigger trace than the card itself. I opened the drawer. The moth silk sighed like a living thing. The night card lay there, dark and deceptively simple. The constellations on its surface were dim, now, but not asleep, waiting. My fingers hovered above it, and I felt the tiniest pull toward it, like gravity in miniature. "Do not touch it again," the king warned. Firm, but not harsh. "Use cloth." I swallowed and reached for a square of catalog linen, folded neatly beside the ledger. With the linen between my skin and the card, I lifted it. The hum in the air did not sharpen this time. The trace, if it existed, did not flare. Relief made my knees weak. I placed the card in the cedar case and closed the lid. Then I paused, my palm resting on the box, and I allowed myself one question that had been circling me like a moth around flame. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked him. "Why trust a scribe in an archive more than the people who stand beside your throne?" His answer came so quietly it felt like my own thought. "Because you are not standing beside my throne." I blinked. "You have nothing to gain from me," he continued. "No title, no favor, no invitation to power. You did not reach for me. You reached for a relic, and the relic reached back. That kind of accident is the only honest beginning I have had in a very long time." My throat tightened, not with fear this time, but with something warmer and more dangerous. An honest beginning. I locked the cedar case and slid it into the bottom drawer of my desk, behind a stack of blank inventory sheets that no one ever bothered to count. Then I wrote a false notation in the ledger, a small diversion, a scribe's trick. I marked the night card's drawer as containing only moth silk lining and an empty display mount, removed for cleaning. If someone checked, they would find something that looked plausible enough to delay them. I was still holding my quill when the hall's lamps cooled suddenly, as if the warmth had been pulled away by unseen hands, not extinguished, just corrected. And in that cooler light, I noticed something that made my blood turn slow, a faint, silvery residue on the edge of the desk. Not dust, not wax, a shimmer that looked like moonlight that had forgotten to fade. A trace, but not mine. The hair on my arms lifted. "Saelis," the king said, his voice tight in my mind. "They are already inside the archive." For a heartbeat I could not move. The silvery residue on my desk looked harmless, like a spill of pale glitter from a festival lantern. But I knew better. In the archive, nothing appeared without cause. Not dust, not drafts, not warmth that shifted without a candle being touched. And this residue did not behave like dust. It pulsed faintly, as if it remembered a rhythm. I forced myself to breathe slowly through my nose, the way Keeper Verilyn taught us when we handled unstable relics. Panic makes your hands clumsy. Clumsy hands break old things, and broken old things make new problems. The king was still present at the edge of my mind, not loud, not constant, but attentive like a listener in the next room. How many? I asked him silently. 1, he replied. Very close, moving carefully. They know this place. My stomach tightened. An intruder who knew the archive was worse than a stranger. A stranger would trip on the rules. A knowledgeable intruder could wear the rules like a cloak. I glanced toward the hall door. It was closed. The lantern staff Keeper Verilyn had left near the entrance cast a straight line of cold light across the floor. No shadows moved in that beam, yet the residue on my desk was fresh. They are not coming through the main hall, I thought. No, the king agreed. They are using the quiet ways. The quiet ways were not myths. Every old building has them. Narrow maintenance corridors behind the shelves, hidden steps between the walls, doors sealed with paint rather than locks. The archive had been expanded for centuries, and with every expansion, some paths were forgotten by the people who used them, but not by the building itself. I swallowed and reached beneath my desk, not for the night card, but for a small tin of sanding dust and a clean cloth. Ordinary tools, scribe tools, the kind one questioned. I sprinkled a thin line of dust near the leg of the desk, where the floor met the baseboard. If someone passed behind me, the dust would shift. If they stepped too close, it would smear. Then I stood as if I were simply stretching, and I drifted away from the desk toward the catalog shelves, keeping my steps soft. My mind raced through options. I could run out and lock myself in the keeper's office, but if Keeper Verilyn was, involved, that would be placing myself inside a trap. I could shout, but the archive would remember that shout, and the wrong ears might come faster than the right ones. I could try to hide, but hiding with a card that left traces felt like hiding with a lantern under your cloak. What do I do? I asked the king. His answer came with a surprising steadiness. Do not touch the card again, he said. Do not open the door wider. And Saelis, do not let them make you feel small. They are counting on that. My throat tightened. It was a strange thing to be advised by a ruler I had never met. Through a relic I was not supposed to have awakened, while an unseen intruder slipped through the archive. But his words held. I moved between 2 tall shelves, as if checking a row of moon ink volumes. The spines were dark blue and silver, all properly aligned. I slid one book out halfway, not to read, but to expose the narrow gap behind it. There it was, a seam in the stone that did not belong to the wall, a thin line the color of old bone, a hidden door, disguised with the same paint as the shelves. My heart thudded. I had never seen it open, but I had heard the older scribes mention sealed passages in hushed tones, the kind you only spoke of when you were certain no keeper was listening. The seam trembled, almost imperceptibly. The silvery residue on my desk pulsed once. I held my breath. The seam widened, and a slice of deeper darkness appeared behind the shelf. Someone stepped through, not with the swagger of a thief, not with the hurry of someone afraid of being caught. They moved with the composure of someone who believed the archive belonged to them as much as it belonged to anyone. They wore a hooded cloak the color of storm clouds, and a thin pair of gloves that shimmered faintly in the lantern light. Their face remained hidden by the hood's angle, but I saw their posture, and it was familiar in a way that made my skin tighten. Not a stranger, a court posture, a palace-trained stillness. They paused near my desk, their head turning slightly, as if listening to the room itself. Then they lifted one gloved hand and traced a slow circle over the air above the desktop. The silvery residue stirred, responding like iron filings to a magnet. So that was what it was. Not dust, not accident. A locator. My pulse roared in my ears. The intruder leaned closer, their glove hovering above the ledger. I expected them to flip pages, to search for the drawer label, to pull the wrong handle. Instead, they did something colder. They breathed out a single word, very softly, as if speaking to a sleeping child. Saelis, my name. I went still, every muscle locking. No one should have known my name in a hall that was supposed to be quiet and anonymous. Not like this. Not spoken with confidence. The king's presence sharpened, like a blade being unsheathed. They have found you, he said. I swallowed. My mouth felt too dry to form words, but my mind refused to go blank. I stepped out from between the shelves. I did not run. I did not crouch or cower. I walked into the open with my shoulders back, as if I belonged here, because I did. The intruder turned toward me slowly, almost leisurely. Even with their hood, I felt their attention land on me like a hand on a shoulder. You should not be in this hall alone on festival night, they said. Their voice was smooth, controlled, and not unkind. That was the most unsettling part. It is my shift, I replied, keeping my tone even. And you are not authorized to be here at all. A faint laugh, barely a breath. Authorized. The "ya" echoed, like the word tasted amusing. You are very brave for a scribe. I refused to let the insult hook into me. State your purpose, I said, or leave. They tilted their head. I came for what you woke, they said. The night card. My chest tightened, but I kept my face calm. There is no such item in this hall, I lied. A clean lie. A practiced lie. The intruder's gloved hand lifted. They made a small gesture, and the silvery residue on my desk brightened in response, as if delighted to be noticed. You can deny it to me, they said gently, but you cannot deny it to the trace. It knows the warmth of your hand. It knows the shape of your want. My stomach turned at the word want. I held their gaze through the shadow of their hood. I did not wake it to serve you, I said. A pause, then a softer tone, almost persuasive. Serve me? No. I came to offer you something you have never had, Saelis. A voice that cannot be ignored. My heart beat once. Hard. You think you are invisible, the intruder continued, stepping closer by one careful pace. A scribe, a quiet woman behind shelves, but you touched a door made for hearing, and the king heard you. Imagine what else could hear you if you handed it to the right hands. The king's presence surged, and I felt his restraint like a storm held behind glass. Do not listen to them, he warned. They are weaving, dream weaving. I forced my breath steady and spoke with the only power I trusted, precision. If you believe you can control what the night card opens, I said, you misunderstand the nature of doors. They open both ways. The intruder stopped, as if amused again. Then open it again, they said softly. Prove it. Touch it. Let me hear what the king hears. My fingers curled at my side. The card was locked, away in my desk drawer, behind plain paper and ordinary tools. I could reach it in a second, and that was exactly what they wanted. I looked at the intruder and felt something settle inside me, something steadier than fear. No, I said. The word fell into the hall like a seal pressed into wax. For the first time, the intruder's stillness shifted. Not anger, not threat, interest. Then we will have to do this the slow way, they said, and their gloved hand lifted again, tracing a shape in the air that made the lantern light dim around the edges. Not darkness, not violence. A hush that felt like the archive itself was being asked to forget I was standing here. The king's voice snapped into my mind, urgent. Saelis, they are trying to quiet you. And I realized with a cold clarity that this was not about stealing a relic from a drawer. It was about stealing my presence from the world. The hush reached me like a veil thrown over my face. At first, it felt almost gentle. The edge of the hall softened. The lantern staff's light turned thin, as if the crystal had suddenly decided it was tired. The distant festival music outside didn't stop, but it slid farther away, as though the world had taken one careful step back from me. Then I tried to breathe in, and realized the air itself had changed. Not in temperature, in permission. It was as if the archive had been asked, politely and firmly, to behave as though I did not exist. I opened my mouth to speak, and nothing came out. No sound. Not even the small, involuntary noise of surprise. My lips moved. My throat shaped the words. Silence answered. The intruder watched me like someone observing a candle being covered, waiting to see whether the flame would die or learn to burn without air. Their voice reached me, clearly. The hush wasn't for them. It was for me. Do you feel it? They asked, soft as fog. The relief, the quiet, the way the world stops expecting anything from you. My fingers went numb at the tips. Panic tried to rise, but it hit the veil and spread sideways. Trapped. That was the cruel elegance of the spell. It didn't terrify you. It emptied you. The king's presence pressed against the edge of my mind, sharp with urgency. And for the first time I felt him strain. Saelis, he said, and his voice sounded slightly muffled, as if the hush had wrapped itself around my thoughts too. Anchor yourself. Now, anchor. I couldn't speak. I couldn't call. I couldn't shout for the keeper's office bell even if I wanted to, but I could write. I lunged for my desk, not running, because the spell didn't allow the drama of running. My movements felt underwater, slowed and dulled, but my intent stayed clear. I grabbed my quill. My inkpot was ordinary, a simple black used for inventory notes. It would not be enough. My gaze snapped to the small vial kept in the corner drawer, the one we used only when copying ancient titles. Starlight ink, diluted and legal, precious enough that we logged every drop. My hand shook as I pulled it open. The intruder did not stop me. That should have warned me more than anything. They were confident because they believed it didn't matter what I did. A scribe could scratch at paper all night and still be unheard. I dipped the quill into the starlight ink and pressed it hard to the ledger page. My name, I wrote. Saelis. The moment the first letter formed, the hall breathed. Not as a person. As a place that suddenly remembered it had a spine. The hush wavered. The lantern staff's crystal light brightened by a fraction. The shelves seemed to straighten, as if offended by the idea of forgetting anything that belonged within them. I didn't stop. I wrote again, slower, with intention. Saelis of the Moon Archive, on duty in the Hall of Quiet Treasures, witnessed an unauthorized presence. The words didn't have to be poetic, they had to be recorded. In the archive, a thing written in starlight ink was not merely noted, it was accepted. It became part of the building's memory, and the building despised gaps. The intruder's head tilted. Their composure shifted just slightly. "Oh," they murmured, "you are clever." The hush thinned enough that I could hear my own breath again. I tried to speak, and a small sound escaped me, raw and startled, like my voice was a door on stiff hinges. I swallowed and kept writing. The unauthorized presence sought the night card and attempted to apply a quieting weave to the scribe. A third line, a fourth, each. Sentence a nail in the floorboards of reality. The intruder stepped forward, gloved hand lifting, and for a moment I thought they would smear the ink, tear the page, break the ledger's spine, but they didn't. Violence was too loud, too memorable. Instead, they placed their gloved fingertips on the edge of the page without touching the wet ink. A ripple moved through the air, the hush trying to reassert itself, trying to convince the hall that these sentences were merely scribbles, that ink was not authority. The archive resisted. I felt it in my bones, a stubborn pressure, like stone deciding it would not be persuaded. The king's attention suddenly sharpened, and his voice came through clearer, threaded with something ancient and steady. "Yes," he said softly, "that is it. Your craft is not small, Saelis. It is law." The warmth of his words did something the hush couldn't tolerate. My voice returned in a thin, wavering line. "You can't make the archive forget what it has accepted," I said aloud, my throat tight. Speaking felt like lifting a weight I hadn't realized I carried. The intruder's hood turned toward the ledger, toward my starlight lines. "I can make it doubt," they replied. "I can make it hesitate, and hesitation is enough." They moved their hand again, tracing a shape in the air above the page. The starlight ink flickered like distant stars in cloud cover. Then they smiled beneath the shadow of the hood, and I understood what their plan had been all along. They weren't trying to erase me, they were trying to slow me down, because the night card was already leaving traces, and every moment I spent fighting a hush was a moment someone else could follow the signal straight to this hall. My blood went cold. They were not alone after all, not physically in the room, perhaps, but coordinated with the search outside it. I snapped the ledger shut with a decisive clap, as if closing a book could close an argument. The starlight ink would dry inside, protected. I yanked open the bottom drawer of my desk, hands steady now, and pulled out the cedar transit case. The intruder's head tilted again. Curiosity sharpened. "You hid it in something so plain," they said, almost approving. "You really do understand." "Your place, my place," I replied, and my voice sounded steadier than I felt, "is wherever truth can be recorded." I did not open the case. I didn't touch the night card. I simply held the box close like a heartbeat held in my arms. The intruder took one step nearer. "Give it to me," they said, and for the first time their smooth tone carried a thread of impatience. "You have no idea what you've awakened." "I know exactly what I've awakened," I said, because in that moment, I did. Not a weapon, not a throne trick, not a way to make someone obey. A door, and on the other side of that door was a mind that had been listening for an honest beginning. I turned away from my desk and walked toward the seam door behind the moon ink volumes. The quiet way they had used to enter. The intruder's breath caught, the first real crack in their composure. "You can't go through there," they said. "Those passages are unverified," I finished, because I knew the archive's language better than they did. "Yes, that's why you used them." I slid the moon ink volume aside and pressed my fingers to the seam. The door recognized my touch, not because I had authority, but because I had recorded authority moments earlier. The archive remembered me now. It would not pretend otherwise. The seam parted. Darkness opened like a held breath released. Before I stepped through, I sent one quick thought to the king, sharp with urgency. "If I leave the hall, can you still hear me?" His answer came without hesitation, and it carried something that made my eyes sting. "I can hear you now," he said. "I will not lose you again." I stepped into the quiet passage, cedar case tight against my chest, the hidden door closing behind me with a soft, final sigh. And in the darkness between the walls, with dust and old, stone and forgotten air around me, I realized something that made my pulse quicken in a new way. I had escaped the intruder for the moment, but I had also chosen a path that would lead me out of the safety of shelves and rules, and closer to the elf king than any scribe was ever meant to be. The passage swallowed the lantern glow behind me, and for a few steps I could not tell whether my eyes were open or closed. The air smelled older here, like stone that had been thinking for centuries. Dust floated in the darkness, catching faint traces of light that didn't belong to any flame. I held the cedar case tight against my chest. Not because it would protect the night card from the world, but because it reminded me I was still real, still present, still something the archive could not be persuaded to forget. Behind the wall, the festival music became a muffled heartbeat. Somewhere above, people laughed. Somewhere above, lanterns drifted like harmless stars. None of them knew that below their feet, a door of attention had opened, and someone was walking through the bones of the city with a king's secret in her arms. Saelis, the king's voice brushed my mind. Quieter now, but steady. Keep moving. Do not stop in the narrow places. How do you know these passages? I thought back, keeping my steps careful. I built the first ones, he answered. Not with my hands, with my decisions. Long ago, the archive was closer to the palace than it is now. I wanted to ask what that meant, but the corridor bent sharply, and my shoulder grazed stone. The wall felt slightly warmer here, as if a vein of old magic ran beneath it. I realized, with a small surge of dread, that the intruder could be using these corridors too. If they knew the quiet ways well enough to enter the hall, they might know how to follow. I needed a plan that wasn't only running, so I did what scribes do when the world becomes untrustworthy. I made marks. From my pocket, I pulled the same starlight ink vial I had taken from my desk. It was a foolish luxury to bring, and yet my hand had grabbed it without thinking, like a lifeline. I dabbed the quill lightly against the stone at each turn, leaving tiny pinpricks of pale shimmer no wider than a grain of sand. Nothing that would shout, just enough that, if I had to return, the walls would answer with memory. A corridor widened into a low chamber where the ceiling dipped like a crouched shoulder. Here, someone had once installed small brackets for lamps, but the lamps were gone. Only their shadows remained, dark ovals on the stone. And in the center of the chamber, carved into the floor, was a circle of symbols. Not archive symbols, court symbols. My breath caught. The circle looked like a map drawn by someone who understood not only roads, but minds. Lines intersected in patterns that reminded me of the constellations on the night card. The king's presence tightened, as if he too had recognized it. "This is one of the listening rooms," he said. "Listening room? A place where the night card was tested," he answered. "Before I hid it. Before I pretended I could live without it." I stepped closer, careful not to cross the circle's boundary. The symbols were worn, as if many feet had scuffed them, but they still held a faint sheen, like moonlight trapped in stone. "What did you listen for?" I asked. There was a pause, and the answer arrived with a kind of honesty that felt dangerous to hold. For someone who would hear me without wanting something in return. My throat tightened. It should not have mattered, not like this. Kings had many reasons to seek reassurance, but the way he said it made it sound less like politics and more like thirst. I adjusted my grip on the cedar case. The latch did not rattle. The night card stayed silent. Still, the chamber felt as if it knew the card was near, like a dog recognizing its owner's scent. "Saelis," the king said, and his voice grew softer, threaded with a tired warmth. "You are close to the edge now." "The edge of what?" "The edge of my dreams." I froze. The title of my fear had finally caught up to the truth. The night card wasn't only letting him hear my thoughts while I was awake. It was pulling my presence toward him in a deeper way, through that river he had described. A pulse of fatigue hit me suddenly, like a wave. Not ordinary tiredness. A heavy sweetness behind the eyes, the kind that arrives when a lullaby catches you unaware. I pressed my fingertips to the stone wall to steady myself. No, I thought fiercely. Not now. If I fell asleep here, in a listening room, with someone hunting the card. "Saelis," the king warned, and for the first time his composure cracked. "Do not fight it alone. Let me help you." "Help me how?" I demanded, and my thoughts wavered, slipping like ink on wet paper. "I will meet you where you are," he said. The chamber's symbols brightened, faint as breath on glass. I should have stepped back. I should have turned and run. I should have done anything but stand in the center of a room built for dream contact. But my legs felt too heavy to trust, and my mind was drifting, pulled by an invisible current. The last thing I saw clearly was the starlight ink pinpricks behind me, my careful marks like tiny promises. Then the world softened. The stone chamber melted into a vast, pale landscape that looked like winter, but not cold. A field of silver grass under a sky full of slow-moving stars. In the distance, a palace silhouette rose like a memory rather than a building, and I knew, without being told, that I was no longer beneath the archive. I was inside a dream. My breath came shallow. The air tasted like moonlight and old vows. I looked down at my hands. They were the same, but edged with a faint glow, as if the dream had traced me in gentler ink. "Saelis," a voice said behind me. Not in my mind this time. In the dream air itself. I turned. He stood a short distance away, not crowned, not armored, not surrounded by any sign of power. He wore a simple dark coat, and his hair fell loose like night water. His face was familiar only in the way a story is familiar, when you finally meet the person it was trying to describe. The Elf King looked at me as if he had been searching a long time, and had just found the one star that would not move away from his gaze. "You're real," I whispered, and my voice in the dream sounded steadier than it had in the corridor. His expression softened, a quiet ache passing through it. "So are you," he said. "That is what frightens them. Them, the intruder, the ones who wanted to make a dream obey." I clutched the cedar case, and to my shock it was here too, present in the dream with weight and shape, as if the night card refused to be, separated from my attention. The king's eyes flicked to it, then back to me. "Listen carefully," he said, and his tone sharpened with urgency. "Someone else is trying to enter this dream. If they do, they will not come as themselves. They will come as something you trust." Cold ran through me. "As who?" I asked. His gaze held mine, steady and intent. "As the keeper," he said. "As Varlin." The silver grass around us stirred, though there was no wind. And in the far distance, beyond the palace silhouette, I saw a new shape moving across the dream field. A figure in storm-colored shadow, walking toward us with unhurried certainty, smiling like someone who had always known where the door would open. The figure crossing the silver grass wore Keeper Verulin's posture perfectly. That was the first warning. Verulin in waking life moved as if the world were a ledger, and everyone else an annotation. Precise, unhurried, certain. This figure had the same certainty, but it sat on them like borrowed clothing that fit too well. The Elf King stood beside me in the dream field, shoulders squared, eyes fixed on the approaching shadow. The stars above us drifted slowly, as if the sky itself was listening. "Do not answer to his authority," the king warned inside my mind. "Even though we were speaking aloud here, ask for truth." Dream weaving, hate's name spoken plainly. I tightened my grip on the cedar case. It was absurd to feel wood and metal in a dream, but it grounded me. The latch was cool under my fingers, the weight pressed into my palms, as if the night card inside insisted on being remembered. The figure stopped a few paces away, the hood tipped back just enough to reveal Verulin's face, the calm mouth, the silver brows, the eyes that always looked slightly disappointed. "Saelis," the figure said, and my stomach tightened at the familiar sound. "Step away from him." The king's gaze did not shift. He didn't flinch, but I felt something like a held breath in him. "Keeper," I said, careful. "If you are truly Varlin, you should know this is not the archive. This is a dream." The figure smiled as if I had confirmed a suspicion. "That is why you must listen," they replied. "Dreams are where mistakes become disasters. You touched an object marked unverified. You activated a door that should have remained closed. And now you stand beside the one who cannot sleep, like a moth beside a flame." The words were smooth, persuasive, almost kind. They were designed to slide under my skin and rearrange my sense of myself. "You are small. You are wrong. Come back to the rules." I swallowed and forced my mind to stay sharp. "Tell me my full designation," I said, "as written." On my archive oath, a flicker passed over the figure's eyes, subtle but real. "Saelis," they said again, slower. "Scribe of the Moon Archive, close enough to sound true, not precise enough to be true." My oath had a second line, a lineage marker used only in formal recordings. Most people never heard it. Verulin had spoken it once, the day I was sworn in a voice that made even my hands stop trembling. The king's voice brushed my thoughts. "Now." I lifted my chin. "Say the second line," I told the figure, "or admit you are wearing him like a mask." For the first time, the dream field shifted. The silver grass stilled, as if holding its breath with me. The stars above seemed to pause in their drift. The figure's smile remained, but it tightened at the corners. "You want proof," they said softly, "because you want to believe there is something clean and simple to hold on to. But the realm is not clean, Saelis. It is built on compromise, on silence, on choosing what must be forgotten so the rest can endure." Their voice was still Verulin's, but the cadence had changed. Less archivist, more court, more palace. "Who are you?" I asked, and my voice did not shake. "Say your name." A hush tried to slide into the space between us, the same veil I had felt in the hall. It pressed toward my throat, toward my ability to speak. I reacted by doing the only thing that had worked before. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the starlight ink vial. In the dream, it gleamed like a captured dawn. The figure's eyes narrowed. "Still clinging to ink," they murmured, as if words could cage the night. I uncorked the vial and lifted my quill. The quill wasn't there a moment ago, yet now it rested between my fingers as naturally as a breath. Dreams answered the shapes our minds trusted. I wrote in the air, not art, not poetry, record. I, Saelis, admit only the true. The letters formed as thin strands of light, floating before me like a ribbon pulled taut. The moment the final word settled, the hush hesitated. The dream itself seemed to accept the sentence the way the archive accepted starlight ink. The figure's face rippled, just for an instant, not melting, not grotesque, simply slipping, like an illusion losing grip. A different gaze looked out for a heartbeat, sharper, older, calculating. Then Varulin's face returned, but the smile had changed. "Very well," the figure said, voice no longer bothering to keep the keeper's warmth. You want a name, spoken plainly. They stepped forward half a pace, and the silver grass bent away from their feet as if refusing them. Marith, they said, once the king's closest advisor, once the only one allowed to speak to him. When his dreams turned cruel, the king's jaw tightened, and something like grief flashed behind his eyes. So it is you, he said aloud, and the words sounded like a door closing. Marith's gaze slid to him. I told you long ago what would happen if you listened too much, Marith said. A king who hears every fear becomes ruled by fear. A king who hears every longing becomes ruled by longing. You wanted an honest beginning. You got chaos. So, you abandoned the night card and pretended silence was strength. The king didn't deny it. That was what made the air feel heavier. He looked at me instead, and in that look, I felt years of loneliness compressed into a single, quiet truth. I stopped listening, he said, because the voices that reached me wanted to pull me apart, and because I did not know how to choose what to hear without being used. Marith's attention snapped back to me. And now he has chosen you, Marith said, as if my existence was an accusation, a scribe, a nobody, someone easy to flatter, easy to frighten, easy to erase. The words should have stung. Instead, they clarified something in me. This is what Marith believes power is, I realized. The ability to make someone smaller until they fit inside your plan. I held the cedar case closer. What do you want? I asked. Marith's smile returned, patient as a slow tide. The night card, they said. Give it to me, and I will do what he would not. I will shape the dream river. I will steady the realm, and you, Saelis, will never be invisible again. You will be named, appointed, heard. The offer slid toward my heart like a key toward a lock. I saw myself walking through the archive halls while people stepped aside. I saw keepers nodding. I saw my name written high on a plaque instead of low on a ledger. Line. Then I saw the other cost, just as clearly. A dream obeying. A mind coerced into peace that wasn't real. A realm steadied by silence that didn't belong to it. No, I said. Marith's gaze sharpened, and the dream field trembled slightly, as if it didn't like conflict. You think you're protecting him, Marith said, but you are only protecting your own fantasy. The king hears you because you are new, because you feel like hope. Hope fades. Then you will become another voice he cannot bear. I swallowed hard. Maybe Marith was right about one thing. Hope could be heavy, but hope offered freely was not the same as hope used as a leash. I lifted my quill again. My voice is not for sale, I wrote in the air. The words flared brighter than the first sentence. The silver grass beneath them gleamed as if washed clean. Marith's expression tightened. You cannot seal a door you do not own, they said. I can, I answered, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. If the door answers to consent. I shifted the cedar case slightly, not opening it, not touching what I wasn't meant to touch, but letting it be seen as what it was, a container, not a prize. The night card is a door, I said. Doors open both ways. You want to use it to enter his dreams without being invited. That is not listening. That is taking. Marith's eyes flicked to the king, then back to me, and I felt their irritation like a chill. You're speaking like you understand court magic, they said. I'm speaking like I understand words, I replied, and words are where all power begins. The king stepped closer to my side, not in front of me, beside me. That mattered more than any crown. Saelis, he said quietly, and his voice softened the air around my name. They are near your waking body. The dream field shuddered. Somewhere far away, a sound like stone shifting echoed through the silver grass. My stomach dropped. The corridor, the listening chamber, the intruder who had chased me into the quiet ways. Marith smiled again, triumphant now. You cannot hold both worlds at once, they said. Wake, and you lose this ground. Stay, and you lose the card. I felt the dream tug at me, trying to keep me here, trying to make the choice. Impossible, so I made a scribe's choice. I wrote one last line in the air, fast and bright, and I looked directly at the king as the letters formed. If you seek me, come to the Moonwell Bridge at first lantern light. The words hovered between us like a promise pinned to the sky. The king's eyes widened slightly, as if he hadn't expected me to offer a place, a time, something real. I will come, he said, voice low. Marith's smile faltered for the first time. Then the dream field pulled away like a curtain yanked from a window. The silver grass vanished. The stars collapsed into darkness. I gasped and woke in the listening chamber beneath the archive, my back against cold stone, the cedar case still in my arms. And in the narrow corridor ahead, I heard a soft click, a hidden door opening, someone breathing, very close, and a familiar voice, smooth as fog, speaking my name in the waking. Dark. The click in the darkness was quiet, but it carried certainty, stone against stone, a door that had been opened by someone who knew exactly where to press. My breath caught. The listening chamber felt narrower now. as if the walls had leaned in to hear what would happen next. I clutched the cedar case tighter, the latch cool against my palm. In the corridor ahead, a shadow moved with deliberate care. "Saelis," the voice said again, smooth as fog. "You've run far enough." It wasn't Keeper Verulin's voice this time, not even a good imitation. This was someone else, someone trained to sound calm while pulling strings. I rose slowly, keeping my feet quiet. I did not back into the circle of symbols carved into the floor. I remembered what the king had warned. The room was a door to dreams. I would not give anyone an easier entry than they already had. "What do you want?" I asked aloud, and my voice echoed softly off the stone, a soft laugh. The shadow stepped into the faint wrong light that didn't come from any lamp. A figure in storm-colored cloak, gloved hands, hood angled low. "I want the card," they said simply, "and I want you to stop being difficult." I swallowed hard. Fear wanted to rise, but I held it down with the only thing I trusted, precision. "You are not authorized," I said, because even here, beneath the archive, words mattered. Their head tilted as if I had said something charming. "Authorization is a story people tell when they want you to forget who has the power to take," they replied. "Give me the case." I didn't move. I didn't open it. I didn't touch the night card. I let the cedar case remain exactly what it was, a boundary. "No," I said. The figure exhaled slowly, like patience put on display. "You cannot outright this," they said. "Marith has already entered the dream. The king has already heard you. The trace is already made. Your choices are very small now. Marith." Hearing the name in waking air made my stomach twist. It meant this intruder was not guessing. They were connected. I slid my hand into my pocket, fingers closing around the starlight ink vial. It felt warm, as if it remembered the ledger lines I had written with it. In the darkness, warmth became courage. The figure noticed the motion. "Ah," they murmured. "Ink, the little scribe's sword." I uncorked the vial. In the listening chamber, starlight ink didn't gleam like a candle. It gleamed like truth, trying to be seen. "I do not consent," I said, and as I spoke, I wrote the words in the air with my quill. "I do not consent." The letters formed clean and pale, hovering above the carved circle like a vow. The room reacted, not with violence, with refusal. The faint wrong light around the intruder stuttered. Their breath hitched, just slightly. "What did you do?" they asked, and their calm finally cracked. "I told the room the truth," I answered. "It's a listening chamber. It was built to answer attention. I'm giving it something it can accept." The intruder took a step forward, and the symbols in the floor brightened at the edges, like a boundary remembering its purpose. They stopped. That pause was everything. I turned and moved down the corridor on the opposite side of the chamber, the way my starlight pinpricks had marked. I did not run. I refused to be made frantic. I moved as if I belonged in the dark because I did. I had been invisible long enough to learn the shape of shadows. "Saelis," the king's voice touched my mind, urgent and steady. "Keep going. I can feel you moving away from the door. Are you coming to the bridge?" I thought back, and the question felt too vulnerable to hold. "Yes," he answered immediately. "First lantern light. I will be there." The corridor tightened, then rose into a narrow stair that spiraled upward. Old stone scraped my fingertips as I climbed. I could hear the intruder behind me now, not running either, just moving, trying to find a quiet path around the chamber's refusal. When I reached the seam door near the canal-facing storage hall, I pressed my palm to the stone and whispered one more line, not to anyone, but to the archive itself. "Remember me." The door opened. Cold night air rushed in, tasting of water and festival smoke. I stepped out into the city, and the lantern-lit world hit me like a wave. Music, laughter, the glow of drifting lights on the canal. People brushed past me without noticing the cedar case held tight to my chest. For once, their lack of noticing didn't hurt, because I knew someone did notice, and that someone was on his way. I moved through the crowds carefully, keeping to the edges, the way a scribe learns to pass through busy halls without interrupting anyone's story. The Moonwell Bridge was not far, a gentle arc of pale stone over a narrow stretch of canal, where the water ran clearer. At night, the bridge looked like a ribbon of moonlight laid across the city. By the time the lanterns began to thin and the sky softened toward dawn, I was standing at the bridge's center, the cedar case resting on the parapet beside me. First lantern light arrived, not as a sudden moment, but as a slow breath. The darkness loosened its grip. The canal turned from black to deep blue. The last lanterns drifted like tired stars. Then I felt it. Attention, not from the night card, but from the world. Someone had stepped onto the bridge from the far side. moving without guards, without ceremony, without any of the weight the court would have demanded. He wore a simple cloak, the color of midnight rain. His hair was loose. His face looked more awake than rested, as if sleep had been a stranger he remembered, but couldn't quite name. The Elf King stopped a few paces away, as if giving me room to decide whether he was welcome. "Saelis," he said aloud. Hearing my name in his voice, in the waking world, made my eyes sting. "You came," I whispered. "I said I would," he replied, and there was something almost gentle in the way he stood there, as if the bridge itself had taught him humility. "And you brought the door." I glanced at the cedar case. "I didn't open it," I said. "I didn't touch it again." "I know," he said, and then his gaze met mine fully. "I heard your refusal. I heard your boundaries. I have not heard that kind of strength in a very long time." The words landed in me like warmth. A soft footstep sounded behind me. I turned, expecting the intruder, expecting Stormcloak and gloves. Instead, a figure stood at the near end of the bridge, half hidden by the last drifting lanterns. Their hood was up, but I could feel the shape of their intent like a shadow on stone. Mareth did not rush forward. They did not shout. They stood as if watching a scene they believed would eventually belong to them. The king's shoulders tightened. "You followed her," he said, voice low. Mareth's voice carried across the bridge, calm again, almost regretful. "I followed the card," they replied. "She is only the hand that woke it." I took a slow breath. "No," I said, and my voice didn't shake. "I am not only a hand." Mareth's hood tilted slightly, amused. "You think words will save you," they said. "They already have," I answered. I reached for the cedar case, not opening it, only placing my palm flat on the lid. Linen still wrapped the night card inside. A boundary within a boundary. "This door will not belong to you," I said to Mareth, "and it will not belong to him either. Not the way you mean. It will belong to consent, to invitation, to listening that does not take." The king stepped closer, beside me again, not in front of me. "I will not let my dreams be ruled," he said to Mareth. "Not by fear, not by longing, not by you." Mareth was silent for a long moment. When they spoke again, their voice was quieter. "You think you can hold a realm together with softness," they said. "No," the king replied. "I think I can hold it together with truth." He looked at me then, and something in his expression changed, as if he was making a decision that had waited years to be made. "Saelis," he said, "I want to sleep. Not because I'm forced, not because I'm quieted, because I choose to trust. Will you help me learn how?" The question was not a command. It was an invitation. My chest tightened, and I nodded once. "I will," I said, "but not as your possession, not as your secret. As my ally," he replied, and the word sounded new in his mouth. Mareth's shoulders lowered, just slightly, as if a long fight had finally tired them. "You will regret opening that kind of door," they said, not threatening now, only warning. "Maybe," I answered softly, "but I regret more the years I spent silent." The dawn brightened, and in that light, Mareth's figure looked less like a shadow, and more like a person who had forgotten how to let go. They did not come closer. They did not attack. They turned, slowly, and stepped off the bridge into the waking city, disappearing among the last lanterns, as if choosing, at last, to stop pushing. The king exhaled, and it sounded like someone setting down a weight. I lifted the starlight ink vial and quill, and on the stone parapet of the Moonwell Bridge, I wrote a single line where the water could reflect it. "This door opens only by invitation." The letters shimmered briefly, then sank into the stone as if the bridge itself accepted the rule. The king watched the words, then looked at me with something I can only describe as relief. "I can hear you," he said quietly, "and it does not hurt." I did not open the night card. I didn't need to. I simply stood with him on the bridge while the city woke, and for the first time in my life, being heard did not feel like stepping into danger. It felt like stepping into daylight.